Hello guys, this is CannibalChess, and in today's video I'm going to be going over the Polario defense. It's a defense for black when white plays the fried liver attack, and so it starts after e4, e5, and then white plays bishop to c4, black plays knight f6, and then white plays knight f3, and then here black plays knight to c6, just defending the pawn from the knight, and then here white plays the famous fried liver attack on the f7 pawn. And so most intermediate or beginner players even they play this idea d5, and then after white takes, then they take the pawn back with the knight, and then they block the bishop from getting to the f7 pawn, but then they sacrifice the knight, and then after king takes, then you do it. And then they would probably push your knight back with something like a3, and then you'd have to go over here with your knight possibly. So that's usually what happens in these games where the fried liver is played. But there's a better defense for black here, because that defense that most people play, it's really confusing. It can get really dangerous for black as well in the middle game if you don't know all the theory. And so it's better to just play it safe here and play the Polario defense. So the Polario defense starts after d5, white takes on d5, and then instead of taking the pawn, knight, or black actually plays knight to a5. And so here there really is no more ideas of this. If white tries to play something like knight takes on f7 now, then you can actually just, well, no, you wouldn't take the, you could just take the knight, and then there's no ideas of pawn going down and then making a discovered check, because then you could just take the bishop, or even if they do this as well and then you take, then there's no idea of queen coming here either, because this knight is protecting the king, and then there's also no idea of going here because the knight's defending that square as well. So here white has quite a few ideas that they could play. I'm just going to go through, I think, the main 3 or 4, something like that. So the first idea is they could play this bishop to b5 check. And the reason they might play this is they're thinking, well, now you will most likely try and push the pawn. So if black pushes here, then I can take, and then once black retakes, then now their pawn structure is messed up on the queen side. That could be one thing they're thinking, and then they're like, well, I can just bring my bishop back to a4 now, and I'm perfectly fine. But that would actually be a mistake for white, and this seems like a logical move for white, so that's why it's an easy trap to get white in, just to have them move the bishop back after thinking they've messed up your pawn structure. And here black actually gains a tempo against white, because white has to move back. So now you can play this move h6, and then you are pushing white's other attacking piece back as well. So here the knight has 2 main squares it could go to. It could go to h3, it could also go back to f3. And there's a case for both, really. You don't really want your knight to be on h3, because then maybe the bishop could come up here and take it. So if the knight goes here, the first thing you want to do actually though is move the bishop to g4, because now that's threatening the queen. The only thing you can do is move the pawn up to defend against that threat. So after the pawn moves up, then you can take the knight, and then now white's pawn structure is messed up even more. So that would be one idea. And then the other move is knight f3. And so if your opponent goes knight f3, then you can get into this line where you can push the pawn, and then they might play something like queen e2 to make it to where the pawn cannot take the knight because the pawn is pinned to the king. And then white could play black could play something like bishop to e6, would be a fine move, just making it to where now the pawn can take the knight. The queen can't take the pawn because it's defended by the knight, so now the knight has to move. And the computer suggesting even g1 would be the best move for white here, just moving the knight back to the initial square that it was on. I would think maybe e5 would be a little bit better, just because it's keeping it closer to your, or not moving it back, just moving it back is usually a bad idea. I mean, maybe the computer's thinking, well, if you move it here, then it'll probably be attacked easier because there's no defense on it, which is probably true. But it's just a horrible idea to move it back, in my opinion. But yeah, so that is the first variation you can get into here. That's if they play bishop to b5 check. And also if they play this move, there's another idea that's a little bit better for white. If they kind of see this idea of if they have to move back here, then you could gain a tempo against them. Then after you move the pawn up, they take, you take, then they don't have to move back here. Instead, they can move their bishop to d3, and this is actually like one of the best moves in this position for white here. So if they move bishop d3, then it wouldn't actually be good here to move h6, because now you're actually giving white a little bit of an advantage. Or now they can move back here, whereas they couldn't before because the bishop was not guarding this e4 square for the knight to come to, because this knight was guarding it. So, but now they could actually move their knight to e4, and then here white's actually better. And you wouldn't really want to take the knight. If you take the knight and white retakes, and then now they have this really strong central bishop that's also targeting this rook. It also is hitting the h7 square. So this would just be not very good for black in this position. So you wouldn't really want to take the knight. Instead, you could play something like d5 even. This is also not too good for black, but at least it's not giving this bishop full range. And then here white could castle, and then you can move your bishop out and then castle as well. So that would be the best scenario for black if you made the mistake of pushing h6 here, but you shouldn't push h6 here. Instead, you should just do something. You could do something like knight to d5 and then target this knight. And actually there's a trick here. It might look like to white that they could just take this pawn for free. It's not a free pawn. After they try and take the pawn, you could move something like knight to f4. And then now their pieces are kind of trapped, because if you try and move the knight out, then once the knight moves, you can just take the bishop, and then after they retake, then you can just pick up the knight, and then your position is much better. So just watch for that if you want to try and play this idea knight to d5, and then see if they're going to go for this pawn. You could do that. But also here, if you don't want to play knight d5, you could play bishop to d6, and this is also a good move for black. Here, white could just simply continue by castling, and then black could move d5 now. They could also, I believe, castle in this position would be fine, and then even h6 would be all right now in this position, because you got your bishop out. You're getting ready to castle, so you're a little bit safer now. So the main moves are just h6, castling, or knight to d5. These are all the main moves in this position. So that would probably be the best scenario for white if they actually saw that they should go to d3 instead of moving back to a4. But most people are going to play a4 just because it looks a little bit better. It's still pinning the pawn to the king. So that is the second variation. And the third variation here is what if they play after this move? What if they play this idea queen f3? And so here, if the idea is if you take the bishop, then your rook is going to fall. So you don't really want to take the bishop. Now the computer is saying that it's actually an even position if you take the bishop and then you allow the queen to take the rook. Your position's actually fine, but as a human, you wouldn't really want white to get the better trade. So here you could play something like bishop to e7, just continuing development, and then this also kind of baits white into attacking this pawn. And so if white attacks the pawn, bishop takes on c6, and then you take back, and then white takes, and they think that they got another pawn. I mean, they are up 2 pawns now. And but this position is actually still better for black after just a simple bishop to d7, threatening the queen and then also defending the rook. Then black's position is actually fine here. After the queen moves, you can just castle, and then you also have ideas of maybe bringing the knight up the board a little bit more, and then also creating a discovered attack on the knight. So those are a few more ideas in this position. And here as well, if there is also the possibility, instead of the bishop even going here, yeah, they could go back here to b3, and then in which case you could just take, and after they retake, then you can go into this line where you play h6, and then the knight's forced back to one of these squares. So you could go into that line from this. Another idea for white, they could play something like bishop to e2, whereas in that position you could take on d5. You could also play h6 and then take. So there's different ideas like that for black. But in most positions, after you begin the Polario defense, black is basically equal to white, and that's way better than if you go into this more played line of the fried liver attack, because here if you play this line, then it just gets really nasty for black after I mean, you could, after white castles here, white's already better by like 1.2. After they castle, they could also play b3, stop the knight from coming here. And so your king is just, it's way more out in the open. After they get the rook to this open e-file or semi-open e-file, then they're targeting your king. It's just really dangerous for black in this position. So instead, I would kind of suggest y'all should try and at least play this idea of knight to a5. And I hope y'all learned enough from this video that y'all might feel comfortable with playing this knight to a5 idea, because this is actually the better of the two ideas in this position for defending against the fried liver attack, which I didn't actually know until recently as well, because I used to always play this move, knight takes on d5, and then after that, then I would just take as well. So it's a very common mistake to go into that line for black. It's usually not a good idea, and so that's why I found this idea, which has been around for a while actually, but I recently found it, and now I'm actually fine going against people playing the fried liver attack because of it. So I hope y'all are fine with it now too, and y'all learned enough from this video that you're comfortable with this idea. So thanks for watching the video, and have a nice day.